All living things are made of cells, but what's inside them? You've heard of DNA, the stuff that makes you you, and you know about proteins, the workhorses of life. But how do those two work together? Let's dive deep into the busy world of your cells. At the heart of the cell is the nucleus, a huge structure in the center of the cell that contains almost all of the genetic material. The nucleus is surrounded by a membrane which has pores to let certain molecules pass through. Just inside the nucleus, the genetic material known as DNA is stored as multiple long strands. Now, this DNA can't just sit around. It needs to be packaged up neatly so it fits inside the nucleus. So the DNA wraps itself around special proteins called histones, forming structures called chromosomes. Chromosomes help organize the DNA and also control which genes are turned on or off. But wait, there's more. DNA isn't alone in the nucleus. It has a helper molecule called RNA, which is made when DNA unzips and gives a single strand to a helper molecule that copies it. This new RNA strand will carry instructions out of the nucleus to the rest of the cell. Now let's talk about the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. There are many of these bean-shaped organelles floating around inside the cell. Mitochondria are responsible for generating energy in the form of a molecule called ATP. It's like fuel for all the other activities the cell does. This process of making ATP takes place in several steps, kind of like an assembly line. First, the mitochondria takes in nutrients like glucose and oxygen. Then it breaks down the nutrients in a series of chemical reactions, releasing energy in the process. Finally, the energy is used to make ATP molecules that the cell can use as currency. Fun fact, scientists think that mitochondria were once free-floating bacteria that were engulfed by early cells. This event changed the course of evolution because it provided cells with the ability to harness energy much more efficiently. But we're not done yet. Let's move on to the ribosomes. Now, these guys are pretty small, but they do a big job. Ribosomes are responsible for building proteins. Remember those proteins I mentioned earlier? Well, they're the workhorses of the cell, doing everything from transporting molecules to fighting off infections. Ribosomes follow instructions from the nucleus to assemble proteins from building blocks called amino acids. They read the code on messenger RNA, which is like a recipe book that tells them which amino acids to put together. Once a ribosome finishes making a protein, it releases it into the cell where it can fold into its final shape and do its job. Okay, now let's talk about another important part of the cell, the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short. The ER is a network of membranes that folds and twists throughout the cell. There are two types of ER, rough ER and smooth ER. Rough ER gets its name from the ribosomes that are attached to its surface. This close relationship between the ER and ribosomes is actually pretty important. The proteins that ribosomes make can be modified and folded properly thanks to the ER. One of the main jobs of the smooth ER is to make lipids like cholesterol and steroid hormones. It also helps with detoxifying harmful substances. Next up, we have the Golgi apparatus. This organelle is like the shipping department of the cell. As proteins move through the Golgi, they're modified, sorted, and packaged for delivery to their final destination. The Golgi also makes some important molecules like lysosomes. Speaking of lysosomes, let's see what these guys are all about. Lysosomes are like the recycling centers of the cell. They contain enzymes that break down waste materials and cellular debris. This allows the cell to reuse the building blocks of those waste materials and keep everything running smoothly. Now, let's talk about one of the coolest parts of the cell, the cytoskeleton. This is a network of protein fibers that provide structure and support to the cell. It's like the scaffolding that holds up a building. The cytoskeleton also helps with transport inside the cell. Little engines called kinesins and dyneins walk along the cytoskeletal fibers, carrying important cargo. It's like a busy highway with lots of traffic moving in different directions. Let's look at another important part of the cell membrane. This is a thin layer of lipids and proteins that surrounds the cell. It's like the walls of a house providing a barrier between the inside and outside of the cell. But the cell membrane does more than just keep things in or out. It also has receptors that allow the cell to communicate with its environment. For example, when a hormone binds to a receptor on the cell membrane, it can trigger a response inside the cell. Now let's talk about cell communication. Cells need to be able to communicate with each other in order to coordinate their activities. They do this using chemical signals called hormones and neurotransmitters. When a cell receives a signal, it triggers a response inside the cell. This could be anything from making more proteins to changing shape and moving to a different location. Finally, let's discuss how cells reproduce. All cells come from other cells. When a cell divides, it creates two identical daughter cells. This process is called mitosis, and it's how the body grows and replaces old or damaged cells. During mitosis, the cell replicates its DNA and then divides into two separate cells, each with a complete set of chromosomes. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the cell. Remember, this is the basic unit of life, and understanding how cells work is key to understanding how all living things function. Cells are like little factories that run on a complex network of machinery. Each part has a specific job to do, and they all work together to keep the factory running smoothly. From the nucleus to the Golgi apparatus, each organelle plays a vital role, and by understanding how these parts work, we can better understand how life works. If you learned something new today, hit that thumbs up button and share what you learned with your friends. If you're still hungry for knowledge, check out our other videos on fascinating topics in science and technology. We've got something for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to be the first to know when we release a new video. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.